All right, we'll take a short break now and look at other solutions. To stay with us.
Well, the Electoral Act Amendment Bill has passed second reading at the National Assembly. And this has been a long time coming. If you've been following the trend, you'll see that this is not the first time we've gone through this process. At some point, it got up to the presidency, but then it was returned. And now this is another, process all over again. And the questions are, what is different this time? And how would this change our electoral process? Mind you, don't forget that the electoral process basically determines the kind of leadership we get. So we need to sort out the electoral process such that we can have quality leadership. And this morning, as you may have seen in that slide, we have two gentlemen joining us to discuss these issues that are of utmost importance to you. Honorable Benjamin Kalu is a member of the House of Representatives and the spokesman of the House. He joins us via Zoom, as well as Samson Itodo, the Executive Director of YIAGA Africa, also joining us via Zoom. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us on Sunrise Daily.
Thank you for inviting me, and good morning, Nigerians.
Honorable Kalu, let me begin with you because, the ball, as they say, is largely in your court. But for a lot of Nigerians, they wonder just how much of a game changer is this? So let me just put it in simple terms. Why should Nigerians be bothered or be interested in this process?
Thank you very much. You see, the need for electoral legal framework reform in Nigeria has become an absolute necessity against the backdrop of election malpractices, widespread rejection of declared election results, violence, loss of lives and properties that usually go along with these electoral flaws. And more importantly, our electoral laws appear to be outdated and, if you may allow me to say, ill-equipped to adequately address these concerns that forms the very foundation of our democracy. And based on this, the Ninth Assembly, through their legislative agenda, when they came on board, prioritized on the need to reform the Electoral Act for obvious reasons. So what we are trying to do at the moment is a proposal of a bill that is to repeal the Act number 6 of 2010 and bring in a new one that is to be known as Independent Electoral Commission Act 2020 to regulate the conduct of elections, both from the state, federation, and council elections and other related matters. Like you asked, what are the reasons for this? Why do we need it now? The flaws are much, like I mentioned. There is a nexus that is between the efficient and effective electoral legal framework and that of the conduct of a fair and free election. This is what this bill seeks to achieve. Also, the need to address the gaps that have been found in the legal framework ahead of this 2023 election, which I'm going to list for you at the moment. But before that, this bill will help us consolidate on our achievement so far, our democratic achievement so far. Because if we allow it, since it's a teaching democracy, we will lose what we have achieved over these 20 years. And what are those gaps that you may ask? You know that our current law as it is does not cover the interests of card reader and electronic voting system as it's supposed to be. The criteria for substitution of candidates, the disclosure of funds contributed to a political party, the replacement of lost or destroyed permanent voters card, the penalty for the possession of fake voters card, the date for conducting primaries and to provide a timeline for submission of list of candidates. The limit on campaign expenses, and as well as addressing the omission of names or logos of political parties in election. We can go on and on. You are aware that 5 years ago, around 2015, we noticed a very big challenge in our electoral process with what happened in Kogi State, where a governorship candidate who was leading at the commencement of the poll, died before the declaration of results. We found ourselves in a difficult position. These are some of the things that this law that we are bringing on board seeks to address, which I'm going to mention to you as we discuss, is found in our section 36 of this particular bill. Now, historically speaking, like you mentioned, this is not the first time we are looking at this bill. It started, the 8th Assembly considered it, but because of typographical errors, it was not able to pass through and obtain the assent of Mr. President. Now, because we prioritized on it, we made it the front burner on the 21st of July. It was given the first hearing. The second hearing came up around the 24th of November. And this bill seeks to amend about 300 clauses of the current Electoral Act, as well as incorporate proposals from INEC and also additions that were made in the bill that was not assented to by Mr. President in the 8th Assembly. It's a combination of all those that we are bringing on board to make sure that this we have will be a solid bill that will take care of the gaps that is currently existing. And some of the areas that you're going to see us looking at in the bill include 180 days to the election, that fund must be released to the commission. It includes that if you are seeking an
Honorable Kalu, if you can hear me.
INEC,
Don't let's let the cat out of the bag, as they say, just yet. Let's get Mr. Itodo's opening comments also, and then of course we'll take a look at these things much closer. So, Mr. Itodo, I mean, yes, these amendments, there are quite a number of them, but as some form of opening statement for you, what is the biggest game changer really, looking at some of these amendments?
Well, thanks and good morning. First is, this is the 10th year, so we are celebrating a decade of the current Electoral Act, because it was enacted in 2010 and has been amended 3 times. The first was in December of 2010 and also January of 2011, and then the amendment that was made in 2015. And what you can clearly see is an attempt to review our electoral law to strengthen or deepen democratic culture in Nigeria. As much as we have amended this act 3 times, it appears that the political class are still desperate for political power. Our democratic institutions are still very weak. The votes of the people are still being threatened because we are experiencing all forms of voter suppression. And so I agree that our electoral legal framework needs to be amended, but it must address 5 things. And the first is, how does it, reset the mindset of the political class in Nigeria? And it's to the effect that we have seen cases where politicians, force INEC officials to declare results at gunpoint. We've also seen cases where politicians, undermine our judicial process, bribe judges, and procure all forms of Jankara judgments just to disrupt and perpetuate themselves in office. The second point is also around electoral justice, that our electoral legal framework needs to deliver justice to the people. And that is why you have a law. The third point is about citizens' participation, that it's important that an electoral amendment really addresses this question of access to the political process for young people, for women, for persons with disability. The fourth point is around, election security. How does this secure people? Because elections seem to be a source of conflict for people, and across the world. And so to what extent will an electoral law, secure people's lives and property? And the fifth very, very important point, it's also about, institutions, that no democracy thrives without strong institutions. And in this case, it's not just INEC as an institution, but our political parties, media, civil society. How does our electoral process respond to this quest for strengthening democratic institutions? And so for me, as a way of initial comment, is any electoral amendment that does not advance these five, goals that I've outlined, which for me are in tandem with the common good, because that's what Nigerians want, and will be an effort in futility. But the current amendments, the proposed amendments, seem to address, some of these issues, but there are some gaps.
Gentlemen, this is not the National Assembly, but when we come back, we'll do some sort of clause-by-clause examination of these amendments. So please stay with us. Welcome back. We're still taking a look at the Electoral Act Amendment Bill, which is going through the legislative process. So just to bring you up to speed about where we are and what to expect from that process. And I still have with us on the program Benjamin Kalu, who is a spokesman, House of Representatives, and member of the House of Representatives, of course, as well as Mr. Samson Itolo, the Executive Director of YIAGA Africa. Thank you, gentlemen, for your patience. So, Mr. Itolo, if we could now take a look at those amendments one after the other. First, electronic voting, which for a lot of people is perhaps the biggest change here. Well, it varies across, but electronic voting. And I see that an amendment was made to Section 52, Sub 2, which prohibits the use of electronic voting machine to empower the Commission to adopt either electronic voting or any other method of voting at its discretion. So that is one major change in this particular amendment bill. And the question will be just how much of a success will that be? A lot of people have questioned that there might be some hiccups, the integrity, they talk about hacking and all that, but just how much of a success will this be?
I think it will lead to a lot of success. And electronic voting will provide access to the people to a large extent, although there are, polling units across the country who don't have, coverage or that data coverage. And so will it, reduce human errors? Yes, it will. Will it promote transparency? To an extent, it will. But there are also some downsides. And that is why it is important that Nigeria should have a deeper conversation beyond the electronic voting to things like the machines. Because one thing we don't want is to, Raila Odinga of Kenya calls them computer-generated leaders. We don't want computer-generated leaders because the challenge with electronic voting is one man can just by the click, alter the votes of the people. Because one thing with elections is the whole concept of trust. Now, electoral trust is not blind trust. If, as of today, when people were voting manually and people can see their ballot papers and see result sheets and they don't trust the result sheets, the results on result sheets, is it when, it becomes automated that they can no longer see that they will trust? So these are things that we need to look at. The second point is about the culture. Trust me, if the political class does not change their culture, there is no amount of technology you're going to bring into the process that will guarantee the sanctity of the ballot, because there will always be attempts to do what? To undermine the process. But it's good to see that this bill has expansive, amendments and provisions for electronic voting. We should, but we have to deploy this incrementally. Let's look at the issue of cost. Now, we've got 120,000 polling stations. We've got about 54,000 voting points.
Moment, before you go to those details, just one moment before you go to those details, there is something you said in response to Kayodi's question, which you mentioned earlier. In fact, you say is the number one item, number one thing that has to be addressed in all of these reforms and amendments and adjustments to the laws that we are talking about, and that is the attitude of politicians. Now, the law has been there A number of people would still always allude to the fact that one of the issues that this law, for instance, hopes to address is spending or election spending and how even that is monitored by INEC. So you said that we need to find a way to ensure that this law is made compelling for politicians, for the political class, and all of that. And you have also said now that irrespective of all of the adjustments to the card reader and all, the attitude of politicians is crucial. So how do we address that? We can't legislate attitude, can we? There are laws, that, haven't been abided by these same people that we are talking about. Otherwise, we would not be talking about the kind of elections that we have been having over time. So how do we legislate or work around the attitude of politicians in a way that, come what may, they line up with the laws?
So the first is, why do people seek political power? And if you look at elections across the country, ask yourself, how come people are spending billions of naira because they want to get into public office? Is it for service? Do you need to force yourself on the people? Why do people have to, force INEC officials to declare results at gunpoint? Why do people have to recruit thugs like you saw in Kogi State election? Why? It's because people don't use power. They don't come to public or governance or public politics with the intention to serve the people. They see it as an opportunity for primitive accumulation of wealth. They see it as an opportunity to appropriate political power, to use it at the expense of the people. That's why they go all the way to use both legal and non-legal means to procure power. And so this desperation, it's what we need to address. And this attitude, can the law regulate political behavior of the political class? Yes, it can. You need to enforce the law. But I say that you need strong institutions to implement those laws. But what our politicians have done is, when they see an institution thriving and it's strong, they undermine the institution. And I give you a classic example. Let's use 2019 elections. As we talk about the cost of elections, the budget for the 2019 elections was 189 billion naira. When did the federal government release the money for INEC to conduct the elections? They released 145 billion naira in November 2018. That's 3 months to the general elections. The remaining part of that money, 45 billion, was released in December. That's 60 days to the elections. There is no better way to undermine the institution of INEC by releasing, the funding for the elections very late. And that's one of the things that this amendment seeks to do, to safeguard, the independence of INEC by ensuring that INEC gets all the money it needs for elections 6 months. That way, you've limited the power of incumbency, or what incumbents use to undermine the elections. You look at the security agencies. You look at the judiciary today. Is the current judiciary able to deliver electoral justice? Most of the judgments that have come from our courts, have really questioned our electoral jurisprudence. And so our institutions are very, very critical. They have to rise above board. They need to protect our constitutional fidelity and hold our politicians to account. And the last point is about citizens. If you look at turnout for elections, have been abysmally poor. The more people stay out of elections and not vote for their candidates, the more we would have leaders who don't respect the will of the people. So staying away from voting is giving this political class an opportunity to perpetuate themselves in office. And so people need to come out, to cast their vote and hold their leaders to account post-elections.
Okay. Well, Honorable Kalu, you have heard him and you're a politician, and a number of people have said that over and over again on this platform and several others. How do you react to that?
Thank you very much. I like what my colleague is discussing. In fact, he's doing the job for us by highlighting some of the reasons why we are going for these amendments. If these reasons were not there, there'll be no need for these amendments. You don't strengthen any institution without laws. We use pieces of legislation to strengthen institutions. And no piece of legislation is 100% watertight. It is as we go on in the use of this legislation, we find gaps that need to be blocked, and we block it. And that is what we are doing 10 years after the Electoral Act. And those who are doing it are also politicians. The legislators are politicians. So when you say politicians are not interested in strengthening the institution, they want to make use of the weakness in the institution, I actually disagree. That is too hasty a conclusion to be made by my colleague who is speaking on the other side. We are interested in building a formidable democracy, and that was what inspired us to, first of all, do the needs analysis that is in line with the wishes, the ambitions, the desires of Nigerians, and which are lacking in our existing law. And we have taken our time to highlight ways to fill up this gap. But suffice that to say that this is not the final position of it. You know, in the process of making a law, there is a room for people like him and other ones who are watching this program to come in via the public opinion through their memoranda, to come in during the public hearing to put in their opinion that will help us strengthen some of the proposals. At the moment, the bill is a proposal before the House. It has not gone through clause-to-clause consideration and all the rest of them. It has been referred to the basic committees of the House. So, which means there are still rooms to, to fill up some gaps that are existing there. But having said that, on the issue of a smart card, the use of electronic device for our election, I like the way he agreed with us that it will add a lot of value to our political system. That we are not going to get it right overnight does not mean that we should not allow tradition to be taken over by innovation. And that is what technology does. Tradition may not be as productive as it's supposed to be. That is why innovation comes in. And technology is one of the fastest ways of increasing productivity in our electoral process. This can read the electronic use of, electronic application in our electionary process. It should be encouraged because yes, there will be bottlenecks when we start it, but over time, I am sure we're going to get used to it because this is what is the standard practice all the world over, and we cannot be left behind. I agree with him that it's going to deliver better result. And also on the attitude of how do you monitor the attitude of politicians? It is by strengthening this institution through laws that has punitive measures. If you look at the laws we are bringing on board, I had you mentioning, I had him mentioning people taking over presiding officers and all the INEC officers and making sure that even on that gunpoint that they declare a result that does not reflect the wish of the people. Now we have a new amendment in our laws now that is in section 28 that has to do with oath by all. Before it was limited to few, but all participating in election process from the side of the commission are bound to take that oath that they will not accept gratification, they will not act in line with fear or favor, they will deliver the expectation of their office without any bias. And if all of them take this oath, it means how they used to feel before collecting gratifications and influencing things unnecessarily is out there for anyone who wants to go against the law. And then finally, on the issue of attitude of politicians, yes, I agree. Money is a big influencer in the conduct of our election. And that is why in our section 90 of this particular proposal, we are saying there should be limits to contribution to a political party, in the conduct of the election. We also said there should be a limit, of the amount that is supposed to be used by each of the candidates. If you are contributing to the party, we don't want it to be above this particular amount so that you will not have undue influence over the political party. If you are running your campaign, you are saying,
Just a moment. On that which you just mentioned now, even the current law has that limit. And a question anyone would want to ask you is, how do we monitor that? So is there an instrument in the new proposal? If you can tell us about it if there is, how you monitor the campaign fundings. Because as you know, many people would say that most of the campaign funding is not done electronically. They are done via cash. So how are you going to monitor spending if there is no way to track?
That is one of the issues that will come up during the public hearing. It's one of the things we also considered during the debates. This particular issue came up, and we are still deliberating on how to ensure that source of funding, it is captured, that the commission, they are also allowed to monitor the source of funding that you can find in that section 90 subsection 2, that they have the right to demand information on the amount that is being used or donated, and also the source. So if there is any suspicion, by the commission on the amount that is being spent, or there is a petition, or there is anything coming from the public that shows that shows the red flag, that announces that there is that a particular candidate or a particular party has gone against the law, the torchlight of the commission will now be beamed towards that candidate or that party. And they are allowed by this new proposal to demand information. And in demanding such information, I know we have various agencies of our law, security agencies that are charged with financial responsibility to make sure that we comply with the financial regulations of our country. And at that point, they are allowed to invite them to do an auditing of process once there is a red flag on this. So that is going to be one of the ways of monitoring what is. The public must be involved. Like he said, public participation. Public participation is not just going to be queuing up to cast your votes. Public participation is going to
just a moment. Even at that, talking about monitoring these campaign funds and all of that, remember one of the functions of INEC is to check the books of the political parties. A number of people, civil society organizations, have alluded to the fact that a good number of political parties do not do that. So if we have laws that are not being lived to the tenets of now, what's the assurance that the next one will?
Because this one has punitive measures that are very well defined, unlike how it was before. If you have a law that does not bite, it will not command compliance. The only way legislations will command compliance is if it has a sword that is attached to the law. So
does the consequence this time around, Honorable Kalu, does the consequence include deregistering a political party that does not open its books to INEC?
That is one of the things we'll consider in the course of the committee level. Like I say, as it is one of the proposals. And that is one of the things I'm going to take back from this engagement with you now. You are just suggesting that the regulation of the political party could be a punitive measure. These are the things that we're going to harvest from the public. When we do the public engagement, we are going to lead advocacy on this particular bill before even the public hearing, where we will harvest the opinion of people like you who have suggestions to make for the legislators to consider before the final version of this proposal comes up. But what Nigerians should be happy with is that we have started the process. We have understood their cries and their complaints about the weakness of the existing 10-year-old Electoral Act. And we are coming up with ways that will bridge this gap. We need partnership. The partnership with the people and the parliament will help us deliver what is meant for us, not for the politician. I will not subscribe to the argument that says politicians are all bad. Politicians want to do this so that they benefit from this. No, it's not about that. We are building an institution that even when we stop being politicians, that it will be able to help us in strengthening our democracy. Our eyes are on the ball. And what is the ball? To make our democracy go from the teaching stage to an advanced stage, where we'll become an inspiration to other African countries that are still battling with their desire to be a democratic government. So that is where we are pushing to set the standard. Was the other one perfect? No, if it was, we will not be here where we are. The one we are doing now, is it going to be perfect? I don't think so. I only think it will be, an advanced stage, a better version of what was in existence before. As the dynamic of the society increases, we will be able to find challenges that need to be filled up. And we will make effort to make sure that we use legislation or legislative intervention to bridge those gaps. That is what the Parliament does.
Well, one of the other gaps which we'll probably point to when we return from this break is the cost of nomination forms. Please stay with us. Mr. Todo, we've seen aspirants having to pay 45 million naira for expression of interest forms or nomination forms, as the case may be. Some 12 million naira, that's for the presidential level. For governorship, you see 22.5 million naira, 12 million naira, and it goes on and on. I know this amendment is proposing, I think, 10 million naira for the presidential aspirant and 5 million naira for the governorship aspirants. But the question is, even at that, don't you think it will be shutting out some people who might not have the wherewithal to afford that, but still they might do well in governance?
I agree with you 100% that this cost is still very high, and maybe the National Assembly should consider reviewing it. Yes, it's a progressive step because what it does is it limits parties to these thresholds, because parties have been complicit in exploiting aspirants during elections and begging high cost of nomination fees. It's quite problematic for our electoral process. So this is a progressive amendment, but I think 10 million naira is still very high. It should be reviewed downward. I know the justification will be that because we don't have state funding for political parties, parties use this generate revenue from the sale of forms to run party affairs. But I think for those offices, I think it should be reviewed downward. But there are two quick points I need to make on this point about campaign financing. One of the gaps in the law is if you look at campaign spending, if you look at section 88 down to 92, it talks about contributions to a candidate. It doesn't say aspirants. And so if we're going to amend the law, we should also cover, the point of aspiration, because oftentimes, donations are made to aspirants before they become candidates. And when they become candidates, it becomes, the party affair. So as we're introducing campaign spending limits and monitoring, it should extend to even when people are aspiring to secure the nomination of their parties. And the second point was around audits and monitoring. Organizations have been monitoring campaign finance over the years. And as at today, I don't know of any prosecution, that has taken place and someone who has gone to jail for violating the law. And it still boils down to this point about strong institutions, that we need institutions to implement these laws, else they will just be there on the page, on the leaves of our Electoral Act. Because if you look at the 2015 elections, look at 2019, both the PDP and the APC violated campaign finance regulations. In 2015, even when the law says 1 billion is paid for presidential elections, we still saw how, about 2.1 billion that was earmarked for procuring arms was used. In fact, the former Minister of Petroleum Resources actually was alleged to have distributed close to 23 billion naira. If you look at the media expenditure of both the APC and the PDP in the 2019 elections, it went above that. But no one is speaking. The law provides that after every election, 3 months after every election, after a general election, political parties are required to submit a report to INEC. As at today, we don't know how many political parties have submitted their audited statements and accounts. So it boils down to what? Implementation. But INEC needs to be strengthened. But INEC cannot do this alone. Civil society, and I think the legislature also has a role, to play in trying to regulate, or ensure compliance with some of these laws.
I was going to take this back to Honorable Kalu just to get his thoughts on the nomination form and what's the thinking. But clearly there will also be a public hearing, and maybe before then we'll have our own version of a public hearing right here on Sunrise Daily. But gentlemen, we have come to the end of the program and this discussion for today. I would like to thank you so much, Honorable Benjamin Kalu, spokesperson of the House of Representatives, as well as Mr. Samson Itodo, the Executive Director of YIAGA Africa. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and wish you the very best with that amendment.
Always a delight. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.